Elias Granger wasn't just another treasure hunter. He was a man haunted by dreams of discovery and the ghosts of failed expeditions. Once respected in his field, his reputation had faded after a disastrous journey into the Andes where his team barely made it out alive. But everything changed when Elias came across a half-burned map and the belongings of a dead explorer named Conrad Blake. The map, inked with strange symbols and a crude path winding into the Sierra Verde rainforest, referenced a lost place known only in whispers, the Serpent's Hoard. Locals in the nearest jungle town spoke of it with a mix of awe and fear. The legend told of a vast underground chamber hidden deep in the forest, filled with treasures from an ancient civilization. Gold, jewels, relics, all protected by mysterious golden snakes. Some said the snakes were magical, others believed they were a biological mutation creatures formed from centuries of guarding sacred treasure. Regardless, the tales all ended the same. No one who sought the treasure ever returned. Elias, however, wasn't swayed. This wasn't just about riches anymore. It was about redemption, proving to himself and the world that he wasn't a washed-up fool chasing fantasies. After securing basic supplies, a machete, and a weathered journal filled with his notes, Elias set off into the unforgiving jungle alone. The journey into the heart of Sierra Verde was brutal. Torrential rain soaked his gear, venomous insects harassed him day and night, and jaguars stalked the shadows. Vines hung like nooses from twisted trees, and the air was thick with humidity and rot. But Elias pressed on, driven by something deeper than greed, a need to uncover what lay beneath centuries of myth. Days into the trek, Elias began noticing strange signs. Stone carvings hidden behind overgrowth, idols of snakes half buried in the mud, and markings on trees that seemed deliberate, almost like warnings. One night, while camped beside a stream, he heard a distinct hissing echo from the jungle. Not like any snake he'd heard before. It was rhythmic, patterned, almost mechanical. As he ventured deeper, the signs grew clearer. He found ancient steps descending into the earth, partially swallowed by vines and roots. Nearby, scattered in the underbrush, were rusted tools, broken compasses, and scraps of a torn backpack. Someone had been here recently or long ago and hadn't made it far. Then he saw it, a golden pendant in the shape of a snake hanging from a tree branch like a trophy. It shimmered faintly in the dim sunlight, untouched by decay. Elias took it as a sign he was on the right path, but with every step closer, the forest felt heavier. The silence became deeper, unnatural. It was as if something was watching, waiting. Elias didn't know it yet, but he had crossed into sacred ground. The golden snakes were not a metaphor, and the treasures weren't unguarded prizes. They were a trap. What began as a quest for glory was quickly becoming a journey into a mythic realm where survival, not discovery, would be the true treasure. And the deeper he went, the more he realized this jungle wasn't hiding the treasure, it was protecting it. After crossing into the forbidden zone of the Sierra Verde, Elias found himself at the threshold of something ancient, something terrifyingly alive. Beneath a collapsed stone temple, he discovered an entrance, a narrow shaft veiled by vines and overgrown brush. It sloped downward as if inviting him into the belly of the earth. With his torch lit and heart pounding, Elias descended unaware. He was walking into the very legend that had drawn him here. The tunnel opened into a vast, underground chamber, the Serpent's Hoard. His eyes widened at the sight. Towering stone columns, cracked and worn by time, framed the massive hall. At the center sat a mountain of treasure jewels, gold coins, ceremonial masks, goblets, and idols from a long-dead civilization. But Elias's breath caught not because of the riches, but because of what guarded them. Golden snakes. Dozens. Maybe hundreds of them, slithered across the treasure like living chains. They gleamed in the torchlight, their scales metallic and otherworldly. They didn't behave like normal snakes. They moved in eerie harmony, responding to the light, to Elias's movements, as if guided by a shared intelligence. Some hissed silently, coiling protectively around relics. Others stared at Elias with eyes that seemed far too aware. He stepped forward, reaching toward a small idol. Immediately, several snakes lifted their heads in unison, their bodies tensing. He froze. The message was clear: touch anything, and you die. Realizing brute force or stealth wouldn't work, Elias withdrew and began observing the chamber's architecture. Intricate glyphs lined the walls, ancient puzzles, ritualistic symbols, and pictographs. OF sacrifices and serpent worship. This civilization hadn't just stored its wealth here. It had designed a sacred vault, guarded by creatures bred or forged for a singular purpose: protection through death. While scanning the walls, Elias discovered part of an ancient mechanism, a puzzle involving rotating rings, pressure plates, and coded patterns in the floor. He noticed that when he stood on certain stones in a sequence, the snakes would ease their tension slightly. It wasn't random. There was a system, a ritual to prove worthiness. He realized that the key to passing the guardians lay not in avoiding them, but in understanding the language of the ancients. These snakes weren't cursed beasts, they were protectors programmed by tradition, maybe even mysticism. If he could decode their rules, maybe he could pass through them without provoking attack. But danger wasn't just in the snakes. As Elias moved deeper, he stumbled across the remains of past explorers. Some were skeletons clutching bags of treasure now turned to dust. Others had marks of venomous bites, their weapons rusted by time. A few had left behind journals, scribbled in desperation. One journal belonged to Conrad Blake, the very man whose map led Elias here. In it, Conrad described how he tried to steal from the chamber, and how the snakes remembered his scent even days later. The final pages were chilling. They don't forget. They guard not just gold, but judgment. This is no vault. This is a test. Elias understood then. This wasn't a treasure to be taken. It was a trial of wisdom, restraint, and reverence. And failure didn't just mean leaving empty-handed. It meant death. Elias stood at the edge of the treasure mound, the golden snakes shifting silently, their metallic scales glinting in the low torchlight. The room pulsed with ancient energy, as if time itself had slowed. Every breath he took echoed through the stone chamber. His heart pounded not with greed, but with the cold realization that this place had been built not to offer wealth, but to test the soul of anyone bold enough to enter. At the center of the hoard was a raised pedestal, upon which sat a magnificent crown gleaming with rubies, sapphires, and emeralds. It seemed like the centerpiece of the treasure, the ultimate prize. Elias felt a deep temptation pull at him. With that crown, he could rewrite his name into the history books. One step, one reach, and it could all be his. But something deep within him whispered caution. He thought back to the journal entries he had read, the ones that ended in blood and madness. Those men had reached for gold. They had taken without understanding. The golden snakes had judged them, not as thieves, but as intruders who failed the test of humility and wisdom. Elias knelt before the pedestal, not to grab the crown, but to examine it. There were symbols etched along the base similar to the glyphs from earlier. He realized they formed part of the same ritual code. The ancient civilization hadn't just hidden their treasure, they'd enshrined it. To take anything without completing the full ritual would be a violation of their sacred covenant. He stood and began completing the trial. Using the clues from the glyphs, journals, and his own deductions, Elias retraced the ceremonial steps he had pieced together. He returned several small relics to their rightful altars along the chamber walls. He stepped only on the marked stones that aligned with the moon phases etched in the ceiling. He spoke an incantation translated from the glyphs, a vow of respect, not conquest. The snakes stirred. Their hissing grew louder, then suddenly quiet. One by one, they began to slither back from the treasure, weaving into the walls, forming coiled patterns like protective emblems rather than threats. The room seemed to exhale. A hidden panel opened in the stone wall behind the pedestal, revealing a small velvet pouch containing 3 sacred gold coins, each etched with the emblem of the golden serpent. These were not random trinkets. They were tokens of passage, a gesture from the ancients. Elias understood. He had proven himself not as a looter, but as a seeker of truth. He took only the pouch, not the crown, not the heap of gold. Just the gift offered by the trial dot. As he exited the chamber, he looked back one final time. The treasure still sat in silence. The golden snakes coiled once more over it like eternal guardians, unmoving, watching Dot back in the jungle sunlight. Elias emerged worn, scarred, but transformed. He hadn't come out rich in gold, but rich in wisdom, experience, and the knowledge of a civilization few even believed existed. Final thought. Sometimes the greatest treasure isn't what you take, but what you leave behind.